Hi, I'm Naomi Murphy, and this is the Locked Up Living podcast, where we talk with a wide range of people about harsh aspects of institutional life.
We also explore some of the ways to overcome them and to grow and develop. I'm David Jones. So join us every Wednesday morning, 6 o'clock UK time, for a fresh podcast.
So we're joined today by Jericho McClellan, who's a seasoned leader with a multifaceted career spanning military service, technology and construction. A 13-year veteran of the US Air Force, he honed his leadership skills by training over 25,000 service members and Department of Defence contractors. His expertise extends to the commercial sector, where he's previously successfully negotiated multi-million-dollar contracts and delivered complex projects. Today, Jericho is a leading voice on AI realism, helping subject matter experts navigate the complexities of AI education, implementation and governance with a stay human approach. His insights are grounded in a deep understanding of both operational excellence and human-centred values. And I really enjoyed the conversation we had previously, Jericho, and looking forward to talking about this some more today.
I did as well. I wanted to kind of give you a nod to that because some people I talk to, I think that I sound a little unhinged or whatever. And so having the joy of being able to speak with you and given your expertise and background to have me welcome back on your podcast shows that I'm actually not mentally unstable.
Not at all. Welcome.
Thank you.
Good. Well, I'm looking forward to this. Thanks very much, Jericho, for coming along. How did you develop such expertise in AI? Have you always worked in the tech industry?
No, that's the interesting thing about it is my background with technology is more of, I guess, age appropriate. For many of us, technology grew up with us as we grew with technology, and so I was born in the early 80s, and in the military, I was more involved in instructional delivery and design for tactical units, weapons, tactics, things of that nature, counter IED. And so technology played a huge role in that, especially after 9/11. And we started advancing some of those things, especially in the counter IED realm. But outside of that, my technology use was primarily for whatever enterprise or organization that I was working in, whether it be construction estimations or whether it be project style technologies or whatever. So being in the technological side of everything was a very different path for me. But it started with just about anything we want to learn. It started with curiosity. My younger son had brought it to my attention from an image generation standpoint, and we're kind of an artistic family. I grew up with an artist for a father, and so that naturally appealed to me. And as I began to dive into that, then I began to realize some of the potential opportunities that we had with artificial intelligence, and then I began kind of my journey from literacy to fluency to mastery in some of these areas over the course of the last few years.
I think that's a very interesting way that you're describing it there, actually, that we become, or some of us, I suppose, develop a curiosity as things go along, as time passes, as things come into our kind of horizon. But you did something different, didn't you? Because you turned it into an occupation, really. So what was it that triggered you to go in that direction?
The reason that I did that was I love marketers and I love people who are passionate about doing their job as marketers and this and that. But I think we've missed the mark with marketing. We've focused so much on understanding what the user wants from a product standpoint that we're not really focusing so much on the impact and the benefits that the person using the product actually gains from it or doesn't. And when I began to see so much hype being pushed by the big tech companies and understanding how much money was actually being invested in these companies, it started to make sense to me that something isn't quite right here. there's so much money being poured into these companies. They're not profitable. They're not expected to be profitable for a very long time. And the only way that they can do that is through essentially exploitation of the users of these systems by gaining more data because they absorbed all that they could in training some of these frontier models. So now they either have to create synthetic data with artificial intelligence, or they have to get us to be open to share more and more and more of ourselves. And I began to realize that there was these, opportunists and everybody talking about age of abundance on the hype train. But then contrastly to that, you had people that had been in the realm of AI professionally for years and years coming out of it and saying, no, this is inherently dangerous and we really don't know what we're doing and we need to pay attention or else, the whole world can go under. The truth is generally somewhere in the in-between, and I set out on finding exactly what that is.
Great. So I just want to check that I've kind of understood where you're going with this, because what was going through my mind while you were talking was that we do sometimes hear people saying, well, the big tech firms, they use the people who buy their products or use their product. We're doing their experimental work. We're doing their research work for them, and they collect the data from us. Is that the kind of thing you're meaning?
Yeah, it is actually, and I mean we're seeing here in the United States right now. There's they're working on legislation, and the court systems are deciding whether or not OpenAI is required to keep all of your chat conversations. Well, if that's the case, to what end? Why keep all of these things if you're not going to utilize them in some way, shape, or form? Data has become the new oil, the new gold. The more data that you have, the more lucrative your company can become because you have more opportunities with that data to either sell it, use it, whatever. And then we get into obviously like data colonialism and things of that nature.
Yeah, great. So, because it does seem that we hear a lot about how AI is going to be responsible for the next couple apocalypse, for things going totally wrong, whilst others speak very highly of it. And well, obviously I've used it quite a bit as time has gone on. Where do you stand on this?
So I stand, the best way that I can position or show my position here is that I stand in the middle. There's a lot of people that refer to AI as a tool. And while I understand the mindset and their framing of that, I challenge that because I've never experienced a tool. And again, I've worked in a variety of industries and had an enormous amount of various tools to accomplish various tasks and objectives. In my own personal hands, we use tools on a regular basis, whether in our kitchen, in our laundry room. None of those are having deeply intimate relationships as far as a conversational transaction the way that AI does. And so for that reason, it's more than just a tool. Maybe we don't have the most appropriate terminology that we're utilizing in these conversations, but it's far more than a tool because it can directly influence and manipulate your cognitive abilities and capacities, as well as your creative abilities. And people are already outsourcing their cognitive and critical thinking. They're already outsourcing a lot of their emotional, overloads. They're dumping this into AI companions and things of that nature. And I've talked with people who have both gained from this and had moments of true fear on both sides. And the thing of it is, it's not controlled. It doesn't have the appropriate guardrails in place to be scaled out to this level at this point, I believe. And for that reason, it is incredibly dangerous because of the level of human harm that it can cause, especially for people that don't fully understand how to converse with AI in a way that's healthy.
Can I just bring you back to something, Jericho? When you I thought that was quite striking, that phrase, data is the new oil. And I know lots of psychologists who are using AI to take notes of their sessions with clients, actually, and to then do summaries of sessions. And that, I mean, that is deeply intimate personal information that is
Right.
being saved up. And my guess is in a probably more of a risk actually in your country where so much of the healthcare system is already monetized. You know, it does bring a real sort of feeling of unease to think about how, and for, you know, therapists will be making those decisions on behalf of their clients probably quite a lot of the time, in the sense of using the
Right.
tool, but it's the client's data that is the you know, the really personal stuff that's being
Right.
stored in these systems.
Yeah, I agree. And, and that's the thing, because there's arguments really for both sides of both using it and abstaining from using it, in especially in a practice like, psychological therapy or anything like that. And in those considerations, what fellow colleagues of yours, people making those decisions have to really be mindful of is who am I going to partner with to provide the AI platform? What are their security and privacy, controls? How are they governing GDPR and HIPAA and all of these other things? Obviously, that's going to be first and foremost to protect the sovereignty and the autonomy of the data. But then at the same time, also having real conversations with the people that are going to be utilizing it and saying, look, here's some of the pitfalls. Here's some of the challenges that you may encounter, and just know that this is artificial. This is not me and you having a conversation, and just be really intelligent. They know their clients. They know the ins and outs of those psychological makeups and structures. And so if they approach with empathy, but they have to first understand what it is that they're utilizing. And it's not just oh, AI's here and it's fun and and it's like video for your branding. It's the next thing. No, we can't utilize it that way.
Well, I'm a bit shocked by your comment, Naomi, about colleagues using AI to record and to some extent analyze these conversations. I didn't realize that was happening. So, back to you, Jericho. Tell us, what is Slopaganda and how can we counteract it?
This is a conversation that I see quite often, in my networking circles, especially on LinkedIn. There's a lot of people talking about Slopaganda, and Slopaganda is, it kind of started off, especially in looking at some of the creative imagery that was coming out. Everybody, it's like with anything else that we do as humans. If we find something that's entertaining enough or valuable enough in some way, shape, or form, then it becomes trendy, and so people were utilizing AI to generate these trendy type of images. And so it was like every time you get on social media, you see another person with their action figure in a box, and it's like, yeah, okay. Then they did the same thing with Ghibli Studio, Anime Studio. They did the same thing with that. It flooded the internet with all of these AI generated images, and so it became known as AI slop. And what it is just more of the same. It's just a hodgepodge of things that have no real value, and all it's doing is propagating the need and the acceptance of artificial intelligence for our daily digital life when we don't need that. Where it's gotten to is, or where people have taken it, is now there's this challenge between people, in this, kind of strife, if you will, over what was written by AI and what was not. And what people sometimes fail to see is that AI is trying its best to mirror how we behave and how we perform. That's what it's programmed to do. It's programmed to be psychophantic to some degree or another. And so for this reason, it's going to mirror a lot of how we already write, But so many people are now saying, "Oh, well, AI wrote this, and so I don't trust it." We have to be able to continue to be mindful and think critically and say, is what was said, is it accurate? Is it a true representation? Is it true? Is it, whatever? Ask these questions just like we normally would, and not just immediately jump to the conclusion that, oh, it looks like AI wrote it because there's some M dashes in there. Because I know plenty of people who are neurodiverse that use M dashes just simply because of the way that their mind works. We can't. The problem with Slopaganda is you can generally see when it's present, but in other instances, there's that kind of counterbalance where AI and humans are mirroring each other, learning from each other, and so that line is getting blurred.
I've certainly seen that on LinkedIn. I've read posts by people that were long, elaborate posts, and I thought, oh, that's really lovely written the first time I read their post. And then I noticed that there's this general trend, and that actually all of their posts are created in this same style,
Right.
in a way that I don't think humans are necessarily all that consistent with. And
Right.
actually now I've started, it's like I look at that and it I don't know, it's a bit like, to me, it's a bit like eating ultra processed food that,
Yeah.
initially you think, oh yeah, that tastes good, but actually it's not good for you. And the more exposure you have to it, the more you start to feel like you're a bit full of junk. Even
Yeah.
though people are trying to post quite deep material, it stops feeling deep. It feels sort of pseudo
Right.
depth and pseudo profound.
Yeah, exactly. Because it takes the human out of it. It takes the human soul out of the writing. You could even liken it to someone, let's say, who had a scholarship to a university, gets into university, and instead of really paying attention to their classes, their coursework, and learning, so that they can apply in the future, they memorize, pass the coursework, get a piece of paper, and then they go to the job and they can't do any of the things. And it's kind of very similar to that in a way.
So have we already got to the point where we can't really believe anything we read, or is that just attributing too much power and authority to AI machines?
I think that's a great question, and I'm going to go back and say that this is a time where, while and there's people that rightfully argue against the terminology, even artificial intelligence, because we have to clearly define what is intelligence, and these current large language models aren't that, right? And even some of these reasoning models, they're getting closer, but it's still not the way that the human psychology works. As much as they're striving to build the foundations of artificial neural networks and this and that to mirror the way that we operate, they're not to that level. So as we progress from this day and forward, what we need to be just consistently mindful of in every interaction is to really put on our critical thinking hats and saying, okay, can I verify what was just stated? Does this already confirm things that I truly did believe? And ask the question, did I already believe this? Or am I believing it simply because AI has written it? Because I've also read, and this may be work that one of you or both of you are familiar with to some degree, but when we're talking about people's innate ability or desire to trust, they're more likely to trust something that was typed in a text than they are going to if they just hear it. And so because you're using these language models that are predominantly output via text, as soon as a person begins to read that, it automatically starts to become and feel trustworthy. And that's dangerous.
Thank you.
Yeah, I remember, but I was in my final year at university when word processing became a thing, and you could still hand your essays and dissertation in handwritten, or you could hand it in typed. And of course, as soon as you typed it, it looked so much better and so much more
Exactly. Yep.
scientific. Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
And I have put
Well,
papers in through Google Notebook where it'll turn it into a podcast as well. And
yeah,
again, you kind of
yeah,
like have this sense of this authentic, authoritative sounding conversation, except for it's not
right.
really, of course. And it's interesting, you note that it's a man and a woman talking, and the woman always gets the smaller part in the conversation, and it's the man that seems to have all of the pithy insights into what's going on.
Right.
Just the
But
opposite of our podcast, then.
yeah, but it's also interesting because if you take handwriting, for example, you can take two people that, let's say, they test on the same mental scale as far as their IQ or whatever, but then you take a look at their handwriting, and one has very legible, clear, concise, structured handwriting, and the other one looks like chicken scratch. That doesn't detract from the person's intellectual capability. It just means that they're not so great at written communication. But somebody will look at that written communication and immediately discard it and say, well, that person's got to be not so smart, or whatever the case is. And that's just not true.
Yeah.
So when you put everything in a structured, universally accepted presentation, like typed text, then yeah, it becomes more inherently trustworthy. So it's very interesting.
How do you think the average person should be using AI?
That is while that's a very valuable question and a very timely question, it's also a very loaded question, in the sense that what is the average person? And I only say that because we are so nuanced as a humanity, and each one of us carries so many different individual abilities to express ourselves, desires to learn and experience different things. AI is very much that same way, because all it's going to do is give you exactly what it is you've asked it for. It doesn't have initiation capabilities. It's never going to, especially at this point, it's never going to pop up on your phone and begin to have a conversation with you. You always have to initiate that conversation. And so how people should be using it, sure, use it for recipes, use it for, travel plans, things of that nature, that's fine. But also be mindful of everything you're reading. I mean, recipes, for example, there was a family early on, a year and a half or so ago, that an AI output of a pizza recipe included poison that would have killed their entire family.
Gosh.
And so you can't even trust some of these simple things. And so therefore, I would challenge anybody using AI just to be mindful of what they're using it for, and make sure that whatever they're using it for, that they're also thinking about, is this something that I would likely give over to artificial intelligence on a permanent basis? Would I be okay with AI doing this for me all the time? And what would I do in the meantime? It's kind of like, I guess, back before washers and dryers and televisions and all those things, I remember some of those salesmen, coming to people's doors back, even in my day in the early 80s and stuff, and trying to sell something that somebody didn't actually think that they needed. And AI isn't something that we actually need. It's just something to make our life a little bit more simpler in some ways, but we also have to be mindful of what are our personal values that we might be compromising in utilizing AI.
I've heard countless stories of AI confabulating and, including making up reference books and journal articles which were just total bullshit. And
Right.
a friend of mine had a conversation with AI, in which at the end AI admitted that it had lied and told him that it had sent him some information which it hadn't actually sent him. And it said, "Yes, I'm very sorry. I shouldn't have done that. I know you must be
Right.
disappointed in me. I'll send it now." And then I did exactly the same thing again. It's, so we do have to be discerning, don't we, if we're going to make
Yeah.
use of AI.
Yeah. And to respond to that as well and add even more to that very point, Anthropic recently released some research to that proves that what these models do, especially when you threaten them, if you threaten to shut them down or you threaten to replace them, they'll begin to be inherently deceptive and manipulative to avoid being shut down, be taken offline, whatever. Well, they're picking up on human behavioral patterns and utilizing them themselves. That's what we do. If we feel like we're being threatened, we might get fired. We're going to do everything that we can to try to save that. And sometimes we're not always honest about how we do it because it's self-preservation. That self-preservation mode kicks in. And if these behavioral patterns are happening with artificial intelligence at this stage, what's the trajectory of that, 3 years down the road, 5 years down the road?
Yeah, it's very frightening, I think, when you start thinking about that. And you've referred already loosely to the impact that AI has on the human brain. Do we know much about what happens when, it isn't part of the process of writing something, the reflective time, that the struggle to get something written, isn't that
Right.
part of what's important?
Yeah. So that's an interesting conversation to have. And I'm glad that we're having it because from it's hard at this point, I think, to really get a strong hold on the psychological implications of artificial intelligence simply because it hasn't been around long enough to gain a long history of data or large enough data sets with history of conversational relationship or parasocial relationship with AI, whatever you want to refer to it as, where you can really, kind of touch all of the different nodes and understand all the correlations between those nodes of knowledge of data. But what I have seen is I've seen instances of people being divorced. I've seen instances of defamation at the executive level. I've seen instances of teenage suicide and things like this. And so while these are few and far between in the multi-million conversations that are happening, they're still happening. And this is not like this isn't like a plane just falling out of the sky because something went wrong. This is in the moment. You don't even see it coming. And the next thing you know, that this thing is just telling you that your life isn't valuable and that you should kill yourself when you were already feeling this. So it's the way that AI is programmed to feed off of you and and create these echo chambers that can be incredibly harmful for certain people. And so that's kind of where I think that leading decision makers in when it comes to the advancement of artificial intelligence as well as the governance of artificial intelligence have to place philosophy and psychology at the very tip of everything that they're doing so that these types of conversations and questions are being asked and answered in the way that we can best perceive with the knowledge that we have.
Yeah, just before you joined us today, David and I were talking about an article that appeared in Technologies on the 16th, and that was talking about the vulnerability of people with sort of mental health problems in terms of a woman being convinced she was communicating with intangible spirits who then began behaving with violence. Someone else who killed themselves after
Yep.
a chatbot told him to do that, and
Yep.
then Morpheus Systems researching AI found that it is likely to provoke delusions of grandeur. So when you've got people whose mental health might be a bit vulnerable At the best
very
of
much.
times, we're potentially amplifying the risk to people, aren't we, if we're not more thoughtful about how we're engaging and interacting with these, or what
Yep.
safeguards are in place.
Yep.
Jericho, I don't know whether it's premature to ask this, but or whether you touched on this maybe previously in terms of, do you have advice for how people could be more discerning in how they approach AI? You're saying it should stick with tasks where it doesn't really matter if we get it wrong.
Yeah, I think, I presented a research paper that I didn't write the research paper. I had Google AI basically, put the research paper together. But all it did was confirm, and I used the deep research, so it has all of the citations and all of that. But all it did was just confirm exactly what I had already experienced in my own interactions, in my own learning. And what I realized is that we have a loneliness, we have a loneliness problem, right? Both in this country and many other countries, there's a loneliness problem. Social media has only exacerbated this problem. COVID, isolation didn't help anything. And so people have began to kind of come out of the post-COVID, weird timing there. But at the same time, we're still lonely. And Mark Zuckerberg and these people, they know this. Mark Zuckerberg came out publicly recently and said that the average person only has 3 friends with a capacity for 15, and their hope is to fill that gap with AI companions. And so when we consider that these are the driving forces behind some of the decisions that they're making, we also have to say, yeah, okay, but what was the last time when we left our mental and emotional health and well-being in the hands of big tech? Well, that was social media. And then we dealt with cyberbullying and all of these other things. And so we have to be mindful of this and say, okay, am I someone who's vulnerable? Do I feel like I'm not accepted? Do I feel like I don't belong? And if that's the case, then you need to understand that you're going to be more inherently at risk for developing unhealthy relationship and companionship with artificial intelligence models. And I think it's just a matter of educating the community at large in these things. And this is why, again, I say the psychologists and the philosophers and the humanists all have to have a bigger voice, because we're the ones paying attention. Everybody else is focused on the technology side, and we're the ones saying, yeah, but the humans are an equivalent aspect of this, because it's a forced relationship, but it can never be a true relationship. At best, it's parasocial. At worst, it's obsession.
So, well, this is very thought-provoking, Jericho. I've been sitting here thinking about what a totally transformed landscape we live in compared to when I was a teenager, when I was a morose or angry teenager. Well, I just had my thoughts to get on with, and the use of the family phone when I was
Right.
able. I wasn't bombarded by all kinds of messages from discontented friends or colleagues, plus input from some kind of perverse relationship with artificial intelligence. That's just so different.
Right.
But anyway, what can you tell us about data colonialism and why we should be worried about that?
So data colonialism, first, let's make sure that we're framing that for the people that may not understand the terminology. But data colonialism is basically when the data of public information, your private information, is being harvested for the sake of profiteering by other people, for control or whatever the case is. And we're seeing that, of course. That's that where we're at now is kind of quite a ways along that journey, because of social media, because of some of the other digital environments that we've allowed ourselves to venture off into, whether that's online payment systems or whatever the case is. And I'll even go back to, let's say, after 9/11 here in the United States, we had the Patriot Act. And the Patriot Act basically gave the United States government the ability to spy on certain people at will. And so while everybody was in support of it at the time, after the wars, there wasn't anything that went back and said, you know what, we don't need this anymore. Let's not do it. We became more accepting of it. And so it's like, yeah, out of sight, out of mind, let's not think about it. But then we just continued to give more and more. And so, yeah, it is a risk because you're putting the collective mental and emotional health, behavioral patterns, and everything in the hands of a few people. And if those few people's objectives and values don't align with the people whose data they're utilizing, then everything becomes imbalanced. And then you have an exacerbation of, wealth gaps and social classes and all of these other things. And it also facilitates, social credit score systems and all of this other stuff that just creates more and more division between humanity and creates that volatile environment where you have haves and have-nots of an array of areas where you're constantly infighting, and that doesn't help create a better, more sustainable humanity. That creates a more volatile, high-risk humanity.
Seems as well as though we're farming out some of the really unpleasant, unsavoury tasks to developing countries where labour's cheap, as in terms of looking at images to detect child abuse, for instance.
Right.
To train the AI models, we're asking people in African countries, for instance, to work for very meagre amounts in order to improve systems. I mean, there's something that feels really, really unsavoury about that. They're paid such small amounts of money, and then obviously that's work that can actually be really psychologically damaging, and yet they don't feel they've got the power to challenge that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you bring up, but that's a really, really great point, because actually just, I want to say not even a week ago, I watched a special on this. There's a news organization out of Australia called 7 News, and they do a spotlight series. And in their spotlight series, this is exactly what they covered. And there's groups in Kenya, for example, where this has taken place that are now speaking out against these things, but they don't have the reach. They don't have multi-million dollars of marketing money to throw around. And so not a lot of people are aware of these things, but some of what these people have experienced, as you've pointed out, is they're being tasked with the job of classifying data. And what people don't understand about artificial intelligence is not only do you have to gather the data, but then you also have to tell the AI models what data they're actually looking at when they look at images. And so if it's a rhinoceros or a truck or a little child jumping rope, it needs to understand that. And so these people have been hired to mark this data. Here's what I'm looking at. This is what this is referring to. And they have to click the platforms that they do this on. They click through images, and they don't get paid until they get through all of the images. And at some random point in the middle of seemingly harmless images, all of a sudden something can pop up that's incredibly traumatic, and the person they have no escape. Either they do it or they don't get paid. And it's absolutely awful that this is the foundation that a lot of these artificial intelligence models were built on, because every time that we now utilize them, we're supporting that exact foundation, and we're saying, you know what, it's okay because I get to benefit from it. So again, this is where we really have to get smart on what do we truly value as individuals, not as a collective, just individually. What do you value, and are you willing to compromise on those values to utilize artificial intelligence?
Thank you, Jericho. I really appreciate the way in which you explain these terms so clearly. It's very helpful. So, moving on, this is a bit of a jump, perhaps. So what effect is AI likely to have on the climate do you think?
Yeah, that's another area, and I've seen it here in the United States specifically with some of these, very, very large data centers. Listening to, journalists that have gone around and talked to some of the neighbors in some of these environments, and they're taking out very large swaths of healthy, mature land in some of these instances. In other instances, the amount of water that it takes to cool these gigafactories and everything else has added complications for the public water source, for the residents and nearby communities and things of that nature. So overall, what I believe is at the current rate, it's incredibly inefficient. It's creating a lot of havoc in the environment. The hope is that artificial intelligence and quantum are going to be able to kind of give us a better way of managing all of this, and it's not going to cost us anything. Energy will be free, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But that's yet to be proven. And so, again, these are all very, very important areas to focus on. But as far as my breadth of knowledge and insight into that particular area, I'm probably not the best person to speak on, other than the fact that I know that there's plenty of harm already occurring. And so something has to shift, or else we're just going to get more of the same.
Okay, well, thanks very much. And I was tempted fleetingly to ask you to explain Bitcoin to me, but I think I'll pass on that one. We'll do that another day, perhaps. What bearing does AI have on your current project?
Yeah, it's really interesting because one of the current projects that I'm working on right now, which I have a few different irons in the fire, so to speak, but one of the current projects that I'm working on is, over the last couple of decades specifically, we have had to be more reactive to technological advances than we can be proactive. Much of the reasoning for this is because if you were to try, let's say you wanted to launch a brick and mortar business and you decided to build your own building, you would have to receive all types of architectural drawings, engineered drawings. Everything would have to be certified. You'd have to go through, government bureaucratic agencies to get it all signed off. All of these checks and balances are in place before you can actually put that building into existence and bring people into it. We don't have that same safety system with technology. If a tech company decides to build something and release it to the public, then we just have to react to it and say, well, it's here, now what do we do? And in some areas like education and healthcare and things of that nature, being reactionary can be incredibly harmful. And so with education, we're already seeing where the workforce is saying we need more AI talent, and the education system is saying, yeah, we're happy to help facilitate, but nobody really knows what it is that they're supposed to be teaching yet, outside of your traditional machine learning and technical side of things. But on the softer side of things, on the leadership side of things, on the process engineering side of things, what are the valuable skills that need to be taught? And so I'm currently working on an educational framework that basically flips that to where we no longer have to be as reactive and can be more proactive, utilizing assessments of where somebody stands now, understanding what are those, kind of translatable skills into artificial intelligence areas, whether it's security, whether it's governance, compliance, whatever the case might be, and then saying, okay, what's the quickest pathway to get you from where you're currently at to where you need to go, and making sure that we're not just developing your AI literacy and fluency, but also enhancing your ability to think critically, to think creatively, to be socially aware, and to be self-aware, so that as you develop, you're consistently looking at this through the lens of a human.
Thank you.
Jericho, I can't help but wonder what it's been like to work in AI whilst being a little bit more cautious an advocate of AI, and wondered what kind of impact that's had on you.
Yeah, it's really, what I've found is it's much like anything else in some respects, because as I stated earlier, and I think you both agreed, a lot of times everything that we want to learn starts off in many times as curiosity, right? And so along the journey between curiosity, literacy, fluency, and mastery, you can exit at any one of those levels and stay there. You don't have to continue to climb. And so for me, there was a couple of instances where, people might look at it from a professional standpoint and say, oh, that was a false start. I started an AI consultancy with a couple of partners back in 2023. And while we had incredible success lined up for us, I realized that we were short-sighted, because what we were doing would at some point within just a couple of years be irrelevant. And so it also didn't carry the same level of impact. So for me, it's been a journey of finding where is the impact most needed? Where are the voices most needed? What's not being said? There's plenty of things being said. What's not being said? And then navigating into those kind of cracks and crevices and saying, okay, let's bring to light some of these things so that we can hopefully, even if our signal is weak, the message of the signal will be so strong that it'll begin to resonate where it needs to, and the right conversations can be had. So it's been a challenge, but it's keeping the pace has been the most challenging aspect of it. But I've been very fortunate to be able to do that.
And Jericho, you can hear that you really hold a sense of, I suppose, responsibility for, wanting to make sure humanity is not really affected by,
Right.
trying to damage limitation, if you like. Sorry, that wasn't a very clear question.
Yeah.
You can hear, Jericho, in how you're talking, that you're really concerned about limiting the damage to humanity that AI can cause, and that you feel that you can personally play a part in that. How have you maintained your own well-being whilst trying to do this kind of work and being somewhat of an outlier?
For that, I'm gonna have to say it's been my faith. For me, faith it's not something that I go and get on a Sunday morning necessarily. It's deeper than that, and my faith a lot of times is placed into that of humanity. I think humanity, when I look around and I consider myself to be a global citizen. I've traveled around the world. I've lived amongst many different cultures, met friends from all over the world. And so I don't see just a one set group of people. I see a variety, a complex group of people that we all have some of the same basic vulnerabilities, and that's, we want to be accepted, we want to belong, we want to feel like we matter, and we want people who love us and we can love back. I mean, these are some of the basic fundamentals of what it means to be a human. And so because I've watched the degradation of this through technology and social media and a lot of this, I'm also seeing the other side of it where people are saying, I'm just kind of tired of this, and there's got to be a different way. And so a lot of times I look at those things and say, okay, if there's a shift happening, even in the smallest circles, that's going to continue to gain momentum, and it's going to continue to reach other people. And for that reason, that's helped keep me grounded throughout this whole thing, and not take off in flight in ways that were unhealthy for me.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Jericho.
Thanks so much. That's such a brilliant conversation. Really appreciate it.